So I'm going to go delve in a little bit deeper into talking about being autistic in the workplace and how employers can help be more proactive about neurodivergent employees and helping them succeed in the workplace. So I'm going to talk about autism. So what is that? Because most people hear the word autism and have preconceptions about what it is or what autistic people look like, who can be autistic. I'll also talk about functioning labels a little bit, and then a lot about sensory processing differences, some research on that. And then I'll also talk about disclosure. And just a note here that people who don't know they're autistic, like I did not, don't have the option to disclose. But it's kind of a double-edged sword. And then I'll also talk about alexithymia, sensory needs, and how those play out with job interviews and getting accommodations in the workplace. And then lastly, I'll talk about how employers can help and be proactive about these things, as well as talking about neurotypical bias and the issue with hiring processes and how it basically makes us work so much harder than neurotypical people to get jobs. So what do you think of when you hear the word autism? So a lot of people think of maybe some children, mostly boys, playing with puzzles and Legos and pictures of eyes for some reason of the children. I don't know why they do that so much because I don't really like eye contact. But also just the notion that we're all white cis hetero boys is totally wrong, and all the research has only been on white boys, and even most of the research still today has been on autistic children and not on autistic adults, and that's only been a recent thing. So we're not all children. There's an NPR article a year ago or something like that was about an autistic adult. So this is an autistic adult, and yeah, we're not all there. Autistic people aren't all white. There's plenty of people of color who are autistic, but there are a lot less resources for getting diagnosed often, or other barriers such as like racism and assumptions about a particular race. And then there's also autistic women. So the company Iris did a video about autistic women, and there are 6 or 7 autistic women who were adults who were late diagnosed who talked about that and their difficulties growing up. And then so when you think of autism, you might think of white boys, and you might think, oh, I've never met any autistic person before, they've never told me they were autistic, so they're not autistic, and that's probably very, very unlikely that that's true. So if you think you haven't met an autistic person, you probably have. There's plenty of autistic girls and women who've gone undiagnosed. A lot of women get misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. Also, even white men get late diagnosed as well. Many people who don't have comorbid disabilities such as intellectual disability or epilepsy don't get diagnosed as children. And doctors just assume that, oh, well, you're a woman, so you can't be autistic. There are a lot of GPs who won't refer you for an assessment. So a lot of people have to seek out resources on their own, and if they don't have resources, they can't get diagnosed. So I was diagnosed at 24 years old, about a year after I found out I was autistic, just based on like videos and stuff, just reading, and finding out that I relate to some of it. And I started reading books on autistic women, by autistic women, and their journey through late diagnosis, and I related to that a lot. So there's just a lot of barriers to getting diagnosed if you're not between the age of, let's say, 2 and 10 years old, and you are not a white boy. Also, fun fact, Anthony Hopkins was diagnosed at 70 years old as autistic, and he talks about it a little bit. I'll give you a quote at the end of my presentation. So I also just want to reiterate that functioning labels are unhelpful. I don't know if you know any high-functioning neurotypical people or any low-functioning neurotypical people. I hope that answer is no, because That's not how we talk about people generally, and it's also not how we should talk about autistic people. But another important thing is that sensory needs and accommodations, as well as our speaking abilities or communication abilities, might fluctuate with stress and also with like being overwhelmed in general. So like imagine that you're like hungover, right? You're not gonna function very well. You know, you're not gonna like be able to think. You're not gonna be able to go to work and get a lot done that you could have done when you were not hungover. So just being in an extreme level of stress is kind of tied with is tied with sensory needs and our communication abilities. So we're much less likely to be able to communicate, especially in a neurotypical way. So sensory needs are needs, they're not preferences. We have a different processing system in the brain, and it varies between autistic people. We don't have all the same sensory processing differences, and some people don't have sensory processing differences, and that's also fine too. But I'm going to focus on that because that's something that really is important to me as an auditory neuroscience graduate student and someone who has hyperacusis as well. So this study looked at autistic people and neurotypical people, and they played it just a tone at 30 dB SPL. It's not very loud, at like the pitch around speech, right, 1,000 hertz. So all they did was just ask them, oh, how loud is this right now? And they rated on some sort of scale. And you can see that with the autistic participants over time, the loudness rating didn't really decrease very much, whereas for the neurotypical participants, it decreased by about 50%, which means, I guess maybe like their attention wasn't on that sound, so it sounded quieter to them. But for autistic people, we might not even be able to habituate to this tone. So exposure to noise or sensory things in general can be even painful. For me, it's painful physically because I have hyperacusis, and also overwhelming because our brains work differently. And for example, this one person was gracious enough to share this image for me to use today, and basically she experiences light sensitivity, and so on the left is how a neurotypical person might experience sunlight, and visual processing, and on the right is how she experiences her autistic light processing, which is very, very high contrast, and there's like the sun is still here, and it's really glary and bad, and she actually uses a dog as like a guide dog sometimes because she is completely in a chaotic environment and just doesn't know where to go because the visual processing is totally different and it's totally overwhelming her. So when talking about disclosing is a difficult topic, and everyone will have different responses or things about it. And so I never had the opportunity to disclose when I took classes because I didn't know I was autistic, so I didn't have any accommodations or anything, which was rather frustrating. But if you don't disclose, you don't get accommodations. You might have to deal with a lot of sensory stuff that you don't want to, make a big deal about because you don't want to disclose that you're autistic. And you might be misinterpreted by coworkers with some of your body language as being assumed to be like rude or cold, or your tone of voice. And so the other side of this is if you do disclose, you might get accommodations, but sometimes you won't even get the accommodations you need. And you also might hear people say, oh, I never would have known you were autistic, or isn't everyone a little bit autistic? I got that one from one of my friends, so that was great. And that's obviously not true. And sometimes maybe you might be assumed to be less competent or capable at your job because you disclose that you are autistic to your employer. They might assume you can't do the tasks that you were already doing before you disclosed. And your coworkers may think, oh, well, you're autistic, so you must not like hanging out with us, so maybe we'll stop inviting you to events now. So this is a big one, is that people often interpret autistic people, especially in the workplace, as rude or unfriendly, when it's just how your body language is, or you just need headphones to work. There was one person who said that they were told that they were being rude, or they, weren't being friendly enough at the workplace because they wore headphones when they worked because of the sound environment. Which is surprising because headphones are pretty common these days. So some assumptions by employers are that, oh, well, if you need accommodations, you'll ask. And a lot of autistic people will not ask for accommodations because they're worried about stigma of disclosing. Because, like I said earlier, either they might assume, oh, you're not autistic because you're not a child and you're not a white boy or a white man, or they're worried they might not be promoted, or coworkers might be annoyed because they have to take the fluorescent light bulb out from above their desk, or, is my superior going to be annoyed by this? Is it too much work for them? Will I not be promoted? Or maybe they'll try to talk themselves out of it and say, oh, well, I'm just having a bad day. I don't need accommodations. I'm just having a bad day with my senses and it'll be better tomorrow. And it probably won't. So the whole thing is really trying to figure out if their accommodation need really outweighs the potential stigma on them by disclosing. So also a lot of autistic people have alexithymia. Not everyone does, but at least last study, it was about half of autistic people have alexithymia. So that means that we may not know why we're stressed or upset. So we may have like weak internal signaling to tell us like that we know we're tired, or that we're hungry. So for example, when I was growing up, I would say, oh, it's too loud in here, or like, this is really unpleasant, when really I meant like, this sound is causing me physical pain right now. And I also kind of assumed everyone else dealt with the same thing, because you don't assume that other people's brains are different. So that's also another issue too that kind of intersects with this. So people were just like, oh, don't worry about it, you're just being difficult, you don't really mean that, because I didn't know how to describe my like actual emotional state at that point. And so that's kind of how our needs go unmet, is because we'll say something in that way and people will assume like, oh, well, then it's not a big deal because you didn't say you were in pain or you didn't say you were overwhelmed, so then you must be fine. And a lot of times we're not fine, but we pretend to be, because if we don't pretend, then, well, we're just making a big deal out of it. There's a lot of gaslighting of autistic people, which is really frustrating, and that can also maybe happen in the workplace. And also we have to translate it through like a neurotypical filter. We can't sound rude or have like autistic body language, because then we might not get accommodations. So some things that I have a problem with detecting because I have alexithymia is a lot of times if I'm too warm, I won't realize it. So I have like a checklist of things that I go through, because if I'm stressed out or like I feel like annoyed or something, because those are like the two words I have to describe it. So either I'll take my jacket off and be like, oh, I was too warm this whole time, I didn't realize that. Like for the last 30 minutes I was annoyed and I didn't know why. Or like, oh, my back's really itchy, and then I realized it was because like this tag is kind of like constantly touching my skin, it's really annoying me. Or I will realize that my stomach started hurting, and I'll think like, oh, when did I last eat? Oh yeah, that was 4 hours ago, I should probably go eat something now. Because I just don't recognize it before that point. Or I also put headphones on because I don't know if I'm like being annoyed by the sound around me, if things are overwhelming. And then when I put headphones on, I'll be like, oh, okay, I feel a lot better now, it must have been that. So it's kind of a trial and error thing of figuring out what the cause of our stress is. And that can be another barrier to actually getting accommodations as well, because we may not know in the moment if someone asks, oh, well, what accommodations do you need? I have no idea. Maybe wait like another half an hour and then I'll be able to tell you. Like I can't tell you how I'm feeling within 5 seconds, because my body I have to actively think about it. So I just talked about the sensory thing with like the tag, so like formal clothing is really hard for us, and that might impact job interviews. So it's better for me to dress down and actually be able to talk and not be super overwhelmed than if I'm in some like scratchy button-down shirt that's like constantly touching my arms over and over again, or like something that's too tight. And that already kind of knocks us down points, right, in a job interview. Also, our verbal skills, like I was saying before, are hard to use on the spot, for especially translating into like neurotypical speak and making sure like everything makes sense in context. And oftentimes even writing in real time is better for me than speaking, even though I'm a highly verbal autistic person, quote unquote. So that's a huge issue, and I think a huge barrier to screening people through job interviews. And also, like I said, new environments are really anxiety inducing and overwhelming, and so just knowing, like, being in an environment before being in a job interview in that environment is actually really important and might help in terms of like, oh, I know I need to bring my earplugs for this interview, or I know I need to wear my sunglasses, and let them know I'm gonna wear sunglasses. Because like just being in a new environment can be really chaotic, just like I showed you with that picture of like the light sensitivity contrast. If you have that and you're also going into a new environment, you have no idea if you'll be able to like navigate that space or not. So things you can do to help with this problem, with these accommodations. So you can ask if it's too bright. So you could really give people options, right? Don't just say, oh, well, if you need accommodations, let us know. Because we don't know if that means, oh, well, you're just being nice about it, or you're just saying that because you have to, right? But you don't really want to accommodate us. It's very hard to tell if someone's intentions are good, because it's another like issue with like different neurotypes talking to each other. And there's also all these unwritten rules that we have to remember that like, oh, when people say this, they don't really mean it. And so it's hard to tell if someone really means that or not. So for example, you could put on your list if you need a fluorescent light taken out, or you would rather use like a lamp desk or move to a window where there's natural lighting. You could also say, let us know if there's like an air vent that's bothering you that you can move away from. Or you can let them know that if there's too many auditory sources, they can move to a corner of the room and they can use noise-canceling headphones during meetings, and that would be fine. And just giving them options is so huge, because then we know, like, oh, okay, like that's something that we can do, and like it's not going to be super difficult for them because they already thought about this. And that's a huge thing. And that definitely would show like, oh, you actually like maybe want us here, which is surprising most of the time. So also you could talk about how in-person meetings, you could say if in-person meetings are a problem or they stress you out, I can either give you the questions beforehand or the topic to make sure that you know what we're talking about, or we can just email them, or use instant message or Skype instead of in person. Because that's also like another really big thing, is that I don't get my thoughts out in the neurotypical way in a meeting, and usually I wouldn't get like 100% of the content that I want out of my mouth to translate through neurotypical filter. So just having that option saying email is fine is actually really important too, because it just adds another layer. Like I feel like I can communicate so much better through typing than I can in like a 5 to 10 minute meeting where the conversation constantly shifts. And also give us warning for presentations or anything off-site, like any traveling, especially if that's not like a common thing for the job. At least 2 weeks or more if you can, because that's also like a big deal, because it's just a complete change in routine. It might throw off your whole week. Like I may prepare for an entire week to go somewhere if it's like an hour drive away. So in conclusion, just let autistic people know that they're not a nuisance or an inconvenience by asking for accommodations, and remind us that we're actually a valued member of your team, rather than just saying, oh, well, if you have accommodations, like just let us know, because that's not really showing that you care about the employee. And then just some strategies for autistic employees. I always bring headphones and earplugs everywhere. I also wear, I don't, but other people wear tinted glasses or sunglasses indoors because of fluorescent lighting. And I also have some scripted things that I say when I'm not understanding someone. So sometimes I don't even disclose anything, but I just say, sorry, I'm kind of literal. Do you mind rephrasing what you just said? Or I have a hard time understanding abstract concepts. So I let them know, like, it's not you, it's just that I need you to rephrase this so that I understand it better. And then I briefly just wanted to talk about how stacked things are against us in terms of first impressions and like obtaining jobs in general. So this was a study where they had neurotypical adults watch videos of either a neurotypical person or an autistic person. Autistic person's in red. And they basically watched a 1-minute video of a person in an interview. And they were either neurotypical or autistic. And you can see that the only thing that is the same, the only thing that has the same content is the speech content only. So literally they gave them a transcript, and that was when they evened out the ratings of their mean impression rating. So autistic people and neurotypical people didn't have a significant difference in the mean trait impressions on neurotypical people by reading a transcript of their words. However, in every other domain, in just only listening to their voice, neurotypical people were a lot higher than autistic people. And also within the video that's actually the worst one, is when you're actually just watching the video, neurotypical people were rated much, much higher than autistic people as having good traits and having a good impression. And even just video only, or even just a picture, showed that they had a huge bias against autistic people basically during interviews and first impressions. And so this just breaks it down more. So autistic people were rated as more awkward, less dominant, less likable, and less likely to want to hang out with the autistic person or sit next to or talk to them. So the only things that didn't change, I believe, are smart, trustworthy, and live near. So that's not super great. That really is kind of a bummer for us. Things that people assume about me are that I am uptight, or defensive, or cold, or the worst one is not paying attention because I don't make eye contact a lot anymore since I know I'm autistic, so I'll look away, and people think I'm not listening to them, when really it's like looking into their eyes, basically having someone shine a flashlight in your eye and being like, hey, you're not looking at the flashlight, why are you not paying attention to me? And those two things are completely separate for a lot of us because we can totally hear what you're saying, but it's super distracting to look at someone's face and eyes, specifically pupils, and not be overwhelmed by that. Because that's super distracting, and we won't hear what you're saying if we're trying to make eye contact. And also, I have a neutral facial expression even when I'm anxious, so people will tell me I am calm when there's like a high pressure situation going on. They'll be like, oh wow, how can you be so calm right now? And it's like, I'm not, I just am not freaking out externally because that's not my body language or how I do things. So I just love this GIF so much, so I wanted to use it. Basically, it can kind of feel like this, like Hiccup's dad is like, just no more of this, just be someone else, essentially, and he's just like, you just gestured to all of me. And that's kind of what this stigma feels like sometimes. And I just wanted to end with a quote by Anthony Hopkins, who talked about how he definitely looks at people differently in terms of him having Asperger's, and that he gets a lot of controlling parts, maybe because that's how people see me, and maybe I'm very controlled because I've had to be. So this kind of encompasses like the neurotypical bias, essentially, right? People think that you're uptight and, I don't know, strict or cold or whatever. So being in a new environment, talking to strangers, and finding a job in a neurotypical society is hard. And I just want to make that easier for people. And I think neurotypical people just understanding what an autistic person, what their experiences is like, hopefully will mean that we just have it a little bit easier, and maybe non-autistic people can help a little bit with that. Oh man, this is too long.